Imagine a country where a single city has more people than an entire European nation, where millions of people leave for work at the same time every morning, return home together in the evening, cross the city in every possible direction, and yet the city doesn't freeze, doesn't collapse into endless gridlock, and doesn't turn daily life into a traffic nightmare. We're used to thinking that more people and more cars automatically mean worse traffic, but in China, that logic simply doesn't apply. Megacities with tens of millions of residents function as if movement had been calculated in advance, as if every car, every bus, every train already knows its place inside a larger system. And the central question is surprisingly simple. How do roads in a country of this scale, density, and pace of life avoid permanent chaos? This isn't a story about perfect drivers or some kind of magical discipline, and it's definitely not an accident. It's a story about a system where traffic isn't a side effect, but a process designed from the start, where the movement of millions is managed with the same precision as a massive machine. And that paradox is where we begin. When we talk about traffic in China, the first thing we have to do is be honest about the scale of the problem, because without that, any explanation sounds like exaggeration or myth. This is a country of more than 1 billion people, where urbanization didn't unfold over centuries, but happened within a single generation. Hundreds of millions moved from rural areas into cities, creating megacities larger than most countries on the planet. In these cities, the car stopped being a luxury long ago and became a mass mode of transportation. The number of vehicles grew explosively, and daily commuting patterns, home, work, home, involved tens of millions of people moving at the same time. According to the classic logic of Western cities, this level of concentration should have led to permanent gridlock, hours-long traffic jams, and paralyzed urban life where every trip feels like a struggle. But China's reality turned out differently. The scale of the problem isn't denied or hidden, and it isn't patched with cosmetic solutions. Instead, it's treated as the starting point for planning, where traffic is seen not as a byproduct of growth, but as one of the core systems that allows a city to function. And that's why, before talking about technology, rules, or discipline, it's crucial to understand one thing. China accepted from the beginning that millions of people would move simultaneously, and it started building cities and roads around that inevitable scenario, rather than trying to fight it after the fact. When you look at cities like Beijing, Shanghai, or Shenzhen, it's easy to mistake them for nothing more than gigantic clusters of buildings, roads, and people. But in reality, these are not cities in the traditional sense. They are complex transportation machines where movement was embedded into the very foundation of planning. These cities didn't slowly grow roads over time, as most European capitals did. They were designed around flows of people, goods, and transport from the start, with each district assigned a function and a role within the overall logic of movement. Residential areas, business centers, industrial zones, and logistics hubs aren't scattered randomly across the map. They're connected by routes calculated in advance to minimize intersecting flows and reduce points of conflict. One of the defining features of Chinese megacities is their multi-level organization of movement, where space is used not only horizontally, but vertically as well. Highways, overpasses, ring roads, underground tunnels, metro lines, and pedestrian crossings exist on different layers, barely interfering with one another. Where another city might rely on a single overloaded interchange, China builds an entire network of parallel and backup routes that distribute traffic and prevent critical overloads. It may not look romantic from an architectural perspective, but from the standpoint of movement, it works with remarkable efficiency. What also matters is that Chinese cities don't grow chaotically. They grow in response to infrastructure. Roads, transport corridors, and metro lines come first, and only then does development begin to form around them. As a result, people aren't trying to squeeze themselves into a system that was never designed for this level of pressure. From day one, they become part of a larger project where their daily routes are anticipated even before they move into new neighborhoods. This is a fundamentally different approach, where the city doesn't chase transportation problems after they appear, but stays ahead of them. That's why traffic in China looks far less chaotic than you would expect if you only focused on population numbers or car ownership statistics. Here, a road isn't just a strip of asphalt. It's an element of a system where every kilometer has a defined role, a specific load, and a precise place in the overall flow of movement. And while cities in many other countries try to fix congestion with isolated short-term solutions, in China, traffic is built into the DNA of the urban environment from the very beginning. That's what allows millions of people to move at the same time without the constant feeling that the city is on the verge of collapse. Another critically important part of this system begins not on the road and not even inside the city, but at the moment a person starts thinking about owning a car in the first place. In China, a car was never treated as something automatic or guaranteed. Very early on, the state understood a simple truth. If millions of people are allowed to buy cars without limits, no infrastructure, no matter how advanced, can handle it. So instead of fighting congestion later, the decision was made to control the number of cars before they ever reach the streets. In many Chinese megacities, you can't just walk into a dealership, buy a car, and immediately start driving around town. First, you need a license plate, and getting one means either entering a lottery or participating in an auction, where the right to register a car can cost tens of thousands of dollars. This isn't a tax, not a fine, and not a one-time fee. It's a price paid for access to a limited resource, urban space and road capacity. The number of plates is strictly capped, and even if you have the money for a car, that doesn't mean you'll be able to use it here and now. This approach is often criticized for being harsh, but it's exactly what prevents cities from choking on their own growth. The number of cars doesn't increase randomly or emotionally. It grows in a controlled way, aligned with what the infrastructure can realistically support. In practice, a car in China isn't a basic right of urban life. It's a privilege that has to be earned or paid for. And what's important is that this rule applies to everyone equally, regardless of status or income, which makes the system feel permanent rather than temporary or symbolic. On top of that, there are additional restrictions that apply even after a car is registered. Some cities use odd and even license plate rules, others limit access to central districts during peak hours, and many apply variable road usage fees. All of this creates a situation where a car stops being a universal solution for every trip. People constantly weigh whether driving actually makes sense, or whether it's faster, cheaper, and easier to rely on public transportation instead. And that shift in everyday decision-making removes enormous pressure from the road network long before congestion ever has a chance to form. What this ultimately creates is a very important effect. The roads aren't clogged just in case. The people who actually drive are those who genuinely need a car at that specific moment, not everyone by default. That's a radical contrast to cities where the car is the automatic choice for every single trip, even when that choice creates congestion for everyone else. The Chinese model shows that traffic can be regulated not only with traffic lights and interchanges, but much earlier than that, by controlling access to car ownership itself. And by doing so, a massive share of pressure is removed from the roads long before congestion has a chance to form. The next layer of this system becomes clear when you stop looking at roads and start looking at what people actually use every day. In Chinese megacities, the car isn't the center of transportation life. It's an add-on. The real backbone of the city is public transport, designed not as an alternative to driving, but as the default and most rational way to move. In cities like Shanghai, daily passenger flows are measured in millions, and that's not an exception. It's the baseline around which the entire urban logic was built from the start. Metro systems here aren't built for appearances, and they don't stop at a few lines serving the city center. These are massive networks that reach business districts, distant residential areas, industrial zones, and even new neighborhoods that aren't fully populated yet. Train intervals are short, transfers are designed to minimize walking and friction, and travel speeds make the metro not just convenient, but objectively faster than driving in most everyday situations. When public transport wins on time, comfort, and predictability, choosing it stops being ideological and becomes purely pragmatic. Surface transport plays an equally important role. In China, buses stopped being chaotic a long time ago. dedicated high-speed corridors, priority lanes, tightly synchronized routes, and unified payment systems create the feeling that you're not switching between different modes of transport, but moving through one seamless network. You don't have to think about tickets, transfers, or route combinations. The system does that work for you. And the simpler this experience becomes, the fewer people even consider using a car for routine daily trips. There's also an important nuance here. Public transport in China isn't romanticized. It isn't marketed as a moral choice, an environmental statement, or a form of social responsibility. It's simply made so efficient that alternatives start to feel irrational when you know you'll get from point A to point B in a predictable amount of time. Regardless of weather, accidents, or traffic conditions, the need to control the situation with your own car disappears on its own. In this system, cars don't lose because they're banned. They lose because they're inefficient. As a result, a fundamental shift happens in the behavior of millions of people. Roads clear up not because anyone is forced to abandon cars, but because most trips simply don't require them. And it's this balance, where public transport is the foundation rather than a backup option, that removes enormous pressure from the road network and allows the city to move smoothly without the constant sense that the system is about to break. But even the best infrastructure and the most powerful public transport systems wouldn't work this smoothly without what has effectively become the invisible dispatcher of the entire city. In China, that role is played by digital traffic management. This isn't an experiment or a pilot project. It's a foundational layer of how cities are run. Roads, intersections, traffic lights, and transport corridors constantly generate data, allowing the city to see in real time where pressure is building, where traffic is slowing down, and where capacity is being underused. Traffic lights in Chinese megacities stopped working on fixed timers a long time ago. They respond to real traffic conditions, adjusting phases based on what's happening right now rather than on theoretical averages. If flow increases sharply in one direction, the system automatically extends the green light. When pressure drops, priority is shifted elsewhere. The city doesn't wait for congestion to fully form before reacting. It tries to prevent it at the earliest stage possible. Another part of this system works proactively. Algorithms analyze historical patterns, weather conditions, major events, time of day, and even seasonal population movements to predict where and when demand will spike. That means traffic is redistributed before millions of people even get on the road. During major holidays or mass travel periods, traffic schemes are reconfigured in advance, public transport routes are adjusted, and drivers are guided through navigation services toward optimal paths. Congestion isn't treated as a surprise, it's treated as a forecastable scenario. What's equally important is how deeply digital management is integrated with enforcement. Violations are recorded automatically without human involvement, and fines arrive quickly and without negotiation. This creates an environment where breaking the rules makes no sense, not because of fear, but because the outcome is inevitable. Drivers don't try to improvise or sneak through because they know the system reacts faster than they do, and it's this predictability of behavior that keeps traffic flow stable and even. As a result, the city starts functioning like a single organism where every element, from a traffic light to a highway, follows a unified logic of movement. There's no illusion of complete freedom on the road, but there is a sense of order, where millions of people can move at the same time without critically blocking one another. And this invisible digital layer often stays off camera, even though without it, traffic in China would look completely different, regardless of how many roads were built or how advanced public transport might be. At this point, a common question usually comes up. Is it all just about disciplined drivers or some unique traffic culture? And this is where a crucial clarification matters. In China, order on the roads isn't based on personal responsibility or trust in the rules. It's based on a clearly structured system of control, where every action has consequences and every violation is recorded automatically. That's a fundamentally different logic from cities where enforcement is selective and heavily dependent on the human factor. A driver in a Chinese city very quickly learns that improvisation brings no advantage. Crossing solid lines, pushing through yellow lights, blocking intersections, these aren't minor lapses or bad manners. They're guaranteed fines that arrive without explanations and without room for negotiation. Cameras operate constantly, algorithms analyze behavior, and enforcement doesn't require a police officer to be physically present. The result is an environment where chaotic behavior becomes slower and more expensive than simply following the rules. This creates a very important side effect. When most participants in traffic behave predictably, the entire flow becomes more stable, even without perfect roads. Drivers stop trying to steal seconds at the expense of others, they don't create unnecessary conflict points, and they don't trigger chain reactions that often begin with a single aggressive move. There's no illusion of absolute freedom on the road, but there is a clear sense that the rules apply equally to everyone and aren't dependent on mood, influence, or status. What also matters is that control in China isn't framed as a purely punitive tool. It's woven so deeply into everyday life that it stops feeling exceptional. People adapt quickly to a system where moving calmly and predictably is simply more wygodno, more efficient, than taking risks. Over time, this doesn't create a culture in the romantic sense of the word, but a habit, where following the rules becomes the simplest and most rational strategy. As a result, traffic stops being a space for purely individual decisions and turns into a collective process. Every participant, consciously or not, aligns with the shared logic of movement. It's this manageability, combined with technology and infrastructure, that allows cities with millions of cars to avoid constant chaos. And the core idea here is very simple. Order on the roads doesn't come from trusting people. It comes from a system where breaking the rules simply makes no sense. At the same time, it would be naive to claim that traffic jams don't exist in China at all. They do. Sometimes they're massive, sometimes highly visible. But the key difference lies in how these jams emerge and what happens afterward. The largest overloads are usually linked not to everyday urban life, but to exceptional events, national holidays, large-scale population movements, peak travel seasons, when hundreds of millions of people leave megacities or return to them at the same time. In those moments, even the best infrastructure operates at its limits, and that reality isn't hidden. It's openly acknowledged as an inevitable consequence of scale. What matters more is this: even in those situations, congestion doesn't turn into total chaos. It's anticipated, prepared for, and deliberately spread out across time and space to avoid sudden collapse in a single location. Traffic patterns are temporarily adjusted, additional routes are opened, public transport schedules are modified, and drivers are informed in advance about alternative paths. As a result, even traffic jams stretching for kilometers don't look like a system failure, but like a temporary overload that gradually dissolves. This is a crucial point for understanding the Chinese approach. There's no attempt to create the illusion of perfect movement with zero delays. Instead, the system starts from the assumption that congestion is a normal part of life in a megacity, but it must be managed, predictable, and temporary. When people understand that a delay has a clear cause, defined limits, and an expected end, it stops feeling like a disaster and doesn't trigger cascading problems across the entire city. In the end, traffic in China isn't a story about the absence of problems. It's a story about control over them. There's no attempt to fight consequences chaotically or rely on the patience of drivers. Instead, the city constantly balances load and capacity, adjusting the system to the real behavior of millions of people. And it's precisely this ability to treat overload as a normal condition, rather than a failure, that makes Chinese traffic far more stable than you would expect by looking only at population size or the number of cars. When you put all these elements together, it becomes clear that Chinese traffic isn't a collection of isolated solutions, but a unified model of movement management, where each layer reinforces the others. Urban planning sets the boundaries. Restrictions on car ownership remove excess pressure from the roads. Public transport absorbs the majority of daily trips. Digital systems manage flows in real time, and strict enforcement makes driver behavior predictable. None of these elements would be enough on its own, but together they form a system that can scale to millions of people moving simultaneously. There's one core idea in this approach that's often underestimated outside China. The goal was never to make cities as comfortable as possible for cars. Instead, the car was deliberately placed within limits, treated as one tool among many rather than the main character of the city. This helped avoid a trap that many global megacities fell into, where every road expansion only encouraged more driving and eventually brought congestion back at an even higher level. The Chinese model also shows that effective traffic isn't about maximum freedom of choice every second. It's about reducing the number of bad choices. When the system clearly guides movement, when the rules are understandable, and when alternatives work reliably, people are less likely to make decisions that harm the overall flow. Personal convenience doesn't disappear. It's simply achieved not at the expense of others, but through a shared logic of movement. That's why China's experience is so difficult to copy mechanically. You can't just add more cameras or build another interchange and expect the same result. What has to change is the philosophy of urban movement itself. Traffic must be treated as a system that needs to be designed, constrained, and constantly adjusted, not as a force of nature to be fought after the fact. In that sense, Chinese megacities don't offer a perfect model, but they do offer a powerful example of how millions of people can move at the same time without the constant feeling that the city is about to grind to a halt. Ultimately, Chinese traffic challenges one of the most persistent illusions of modern cities, the idea that congestion is an unavoidable price for freedom of movement and high population density. China's experience suggests the opposite. The problem isn't how many people or cars there are, but whether a system exists that can manage movement at every level simultaneously. Instead of searching for magic fixes or relying on self-regulation, China builds a model where traffic is treated from the very beginning as a question of management, not chance. The key takeaway is this: efficient movement in a megacity starts long before the first traffic light. It begins with how the city is planned, with limits that prevent the system from being overloaded, with sustained investment in public transport, and with digital control that makes human behavior predictable. In this logic, comfort isn't created by maximizing freedom for every individual driver. It's created by reducing chaos for everyone at once. And this is where the central, and perhaps uncomfortable, idea emerges. When millions of people move at the same time, freedom doesn't mean the absence of rules. It means the presence of a system where everyone understands their boundaries and recognizes that those boundaries exist not to restrict movement, but to make movement possible in the first place. Traffic in China isn't about perfect roads or perfect people. It's about a conscious choice in favor of control instead of chaos. If you zoom out even further, it becomes clear that this story isn't only about traffic. It's about how large systems function in the modern world as a whole. When scale grows beyond what spontaneous decisions can handle, survival doesn't favor the most free, it favors the most organized. And while some cities continue to fight congestion as a problem, China simply manages movement, turning millions of individual trips into a single coordinated flow.